All right, welcome. In this video, I'm just going to demonstrate and talk about IDEs. So let's get started. So if you go here in the Start Here module of the course, you will see read about IDE tips and suggestions. So an IDE is more than a compiler. So you might have heard the term compiler, but basically an IDE includes compiling, and it also includes linking and taking your source code file and turning it into a working application. So let's just get started and go through this presentation, and then I'll demonstrate Visual Studio for you. All right, so when you write code, we are going to be using the language C to write our code, and C is just plain text. You can open it with Notepad or text edit, and you can type in it, and it's just a plain text file. If you were to write HTML, C#, C++, Java, all of that is plain text. But we're going to take this code that's written in this language C that is plain text and turn it into an interactive application. So the goal is to, in order to do that, you can't just type in Notepad and then test it. You need to have a software, and you need to download a software that's going to help you to be able to take this plain text file, which looks like this in Notepad. This is an example of what C code looks like, and put it into your compiler and build it and turn it into an application. So you will need an IDE. IDE stands for Integrated Development Environment. So my suggestion is to download Visual Studio. This is a little bit of an old presentation. I don't recommend Visual Studio 2019. I do recommend Visual Studio 2022. So it should be 2022 and 2022. You can download 2019, it doesn't matter, but I would recommend 2022. So once you download it and you put it in your compiler, the code will be color coded in order to help you to develop your program. And this is an example of what it looks like in Visual Studio. If you cannot and don't have Windows, then the compiler of choice of recommendation, again, of choice is your choice. I recommend that you try Xcode. You can use an online compiler. This is an example of an online compiler or IDE. All you need to do is go to Google and type in C compiler or whatever. And here's an example of one. If this launches. Yep, so this is an example of an online compiler. All you need is a browser, and you can type your code in here. This is not my recommendation. My recommendation is to download and use a compiler. So a little bit of terms about a computer and source code and syntax. So when you are using a compiler, the compiler is just going through your code to make sure that your code is following the rules of the language. And following the rules of the language is called following the syntax of the language. But taking your source file code, which is plain text, remember I said this is plain text, it needs to go through a series of steps. You need to compile your code, check for any syntax errors and make sure, and then it will compile, and then it will turn it into an object file. And then this object file will get linked with other things that it needs in order to create an application. So hopefully my diagram is next. Here's my diagram, correct. So you have your word processor, that's part of your IDE. That was the what I just showed you. And you type in your code, it goes through, it makes sure you don't have any errors. Then it creates an object file, links that object file, and creates a working application. Now, as far as this goes, I'm not going to ask you any questions on compiling, linking, but the idea of it, it's very important to understand how you need to have a complete software package to make this happen. But it's even better and easier to understand by demonstration. So now I'm going to demonstrate for you how to use Visual Studio. So I have Visual Studio here. I'm going to launch Visual Studio. So the steps to create an empty project in Visual Studio is create new project. Visual Studio, we will be using a C++ compiler. So you want to make sure that we're going to do C programming in a C++ compiler. So you want to make sure that you make it an empty project. You hit next. You can navigate to wherever you want to put it. I'm going to put it on my desktop. This is how you navigate. Right here, you're naming the folder of the project. Hit create. Now it's creating the project for me. And now I'm going to say project, add new item. I want to name my source code file with we're going to click .cpp, but like I said, we're using a C++ compiler to do C programming. So I'm going to just call this hello.c, not hello.c. This will be my first program. Usually by convention, we do hello.c. So now my source file is part of my project. And now I can go ahead and type in my code. I'm just going to get here the template part from the top of another program here. All right, so for each assignment that I give you, I will give you a template. If you are using Visual Studio, you want to get used to having this at the top of your program. It's not required for other compilers, but it does need to be there for Visual Studio. So each and every time that I give you an assignment, I will give you, for example, when we go here to assignments, like program 1, I will give you a template to help you get started. So you can download this template as a TXT file. And you can open it with Notepad or whatever. And you can copy and paste this into your project and use that template to get started. So right here's where you're going to printf, hello world. And so this is my first program with Visual Studio after I've downloaded it and installed it. So once I type in, I want to make sure that it works. I go here and hit build. When I hit build solution, it's actually going through the steps to build, compile, link, and turn it into a working application. As long as it is successful, then it will run the application. Start without debugging, and it works. And so now I see that it works. If I want to locate the source code on my computer, I just open the file. I put it on my desktop. The project was called Project 5. And here is my source file. It might say C source, it might say source code file, but I can always right click on it and say open with Notepad. And I can see that this is the same code that is typed into my IDE, into my Smart Editor. And this is what I will be submitting for my assignment. So if you need some assistance on that, I will show you that in addition to this video, I have a document right here, how to submit your source code. It shows you how to you choose your file, how to find your source code file in your project. So I do have a PDF here to show you how to do that. In addition, on this page here, on the IDE tips and suggestions, I have a PDF of what to install when you install Visual Studio. Just downloads. I'm going to download it because it's taking too long. So you want to make sure when you install and download Visual Studio that you download desktop development with C++. That's all you need is desktop development with C++. And I also have a PDF of what I just did, getting started. right here. This is a PDF with screenshots of how I just launched Visual Studio and created an empty project. Let's open the PDF. Let's take you talk. So I launched Visual Studio, create an empty project, configure, place it in the right location, and name it with a .c extension, add it to my project, hit build, and hit start without debugging. So here's a PDF and everything. There's PDFs. For this class, there's a ton of information and it can be overwhelming in the beginning. So my recommendation to you is slowly to just go through things one at a time. Take your time, ask questions. Feel free to email me with any questions. I'm very happy to answer your questions, and look for an announcement with a Zoom meeting. I will be hosting one early in the week of when classes begin.